It's your own fault, Dad. My son Richard's voice was a blade of ice over the phone. Not a hint of concern, just judgment. You want me to liquidate assets to cover your mistake? That's not how a portfolio works. He didn't know I was holding a lottery ticket worth $80 million. He didn't know this wasn't a mistake. It was a test, and he had just given me his answer. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. It's your own fault. The words echoed in the silence of my kitchen long after I'd ended the call. They hung in the air, cold and clinical, like a doctor's diagnosis delivered without an ounce of compassion. He hadn't asked if I was okay. He hadn't asked what had happened. He had simply rendered his verdict, a judgment passed from the pristine, leather-bound world of my son Richard, the master of a universe built on portfolios and assets, a universe in which a father apparently was a liability. It's a strange thing to realize you have become a ghost in your own life. For years I had felt myself fading, becoming translucent. My opinions, my stories, my very presence had become like old furniture, familiar, but ultimately in the way. They'd walk around me, talk through me. I was the silent, reliable ATM in the corner of the room, the one you only notice when you need to make a withdrawal. But that lottery ticket, that slip of paper with its impossible sequence of numbers didn't make me feel rich. It made me feel solid. It was like a blacksmith's hammer striking a cold piece of iron, and for the first time in a decade, I felt the shock of my own existence. $80 million. It wasn't a fortune. It was a lens, a magnifying glass powerful enough to examine the fine print of their souls. Before that ticket, my life was a series of quiet sacrifices, each one a brick in the wall of their comfort. I never kept a tally. A father doesn't. Or at least, I had always told myself he shouldn't. My wife, Eleanor, she was the one who saw. Before she passed, she would sometimes take my hand after one of their visits, her grip surprisingly firm, for such delicate fingers. "Be careful, Arthur," she'd whisper, her eyes full of a sad, knowing light. "Their hunger is not for what you give, it's for what you have left." I never understood what she meant. Not really. Not until now. Now, sitting in the quiet hum of the old refrigerator, her words were a prophecy fulfilled. My relationship with Richard had always been transactional. Even as a boy, he saw the world in terms of gains and losses. I remember when he graduated from business school, a degree I had paid for by selling the 1967 Mustang I'd spent 15 years restoring with my own hands. It was my one vanity, my connection to a younger, freer version of myself. I sold it without a second thought because his future was more important. At his graduation dinner, he didn't toast to my sacrifice. He presented a PowerPoint presentation on a laptop, outlining his 5-year plan for wealth accumulation. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with ambition, not gratitude. "Dad, this is what real success looks like," he'd said, gesturing to a slide filled with market projections. "Not punching a clock for 40 years for a pension and a handshake. We need to get your assets working for you. That house," he'd pointed, a thumb back in the direction of our home, "is dead capital." I had forced a smile. "I'm proud of you, son. But we were happy in that house. Your mother loved her garden." He'd waved a dismissive hand. "Happiness doesn't compound annually, Dad." That was Richard. Cold, efficient, and utterly incapable of understanding any value that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. For him, love was a poor investment. Family was a non-performing asset. My call to him wasn't just the first step in my plan, it was a confirmation of a truth I had long tried to ignore. He saw my supposed failure not as a tragedy, but as an annoying validation of his own worldview. I wasn't his father in trouble. I was a bad stock he was glad he never invested in. Then there was my daughter, Chloe. If Richard was a blade of ice, Chloe was a beautiful, suffocating vine. She didn't demand. She absorbed. She consumed attention, sympathy, and money with a breathless, tragic air, as if her very existence was a constant, delicate struggle. She had married well, to a man whose only personality trait was his bank, balance, and yet she was perpetually on the verge of a financial and emotional crisis. Just last Christmas, she had called me, her voice a carefully constructed sob. "Daddy, I just don't know what to do. The holidays are so stressful and the children need a change of scenery. We saw this little villa in Tuscany for a month. It would be so healing for us. I had just gotten the estimate for the, new roof Eleanor had always wanted. The shingles were curling and the winter rains were coming. I looked at the quote on the table, then closed my eyes and pictured Chloe's disappointed face. "How much, sweetheart?" I'd asked. "It's an investment. In our family's well-being, Daddy," she'd said, the number she quoted being almost exactly the cost of the new roof. "You can't put a price on that." So I put a price on it. I paid for her Italian healing, and my roof continued to leak through another winter. The small, dark stain on the ceiling of my bedroom became a daily reminder of her investment. She sent me a postcard. It had a picture of a vineyard and a single sentence scrawled on the back. "Wish you were here." I knew she didn't. She just wished my wallet was. For Chloe, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, a safety net woven from guilt, and obligation that she could fall back on whenever her cushioned life felt momentarily uncomfortable. Her tears were her currency, and for too long, I had been an all-too-willing exchange. And finally, there was David, my brother-in-law, Eleanor's sister's husband. After my sister-in-law passed, David had clung to our family like a barnacle. He was a man of grand ideas and zero follow-through, a walking encyclopedia of get-rich-quick schemes that always ended with him needing a small bridge loan to get to the next, even grander idea. He wore his failures like a badge of honor, proof that he was a misunderstood visionary in a world too small for his dreams. His last visit had been the most audacious. He'd arrived with a glossy brochure for something he called Aqualux, a venture to sell artisanal mineral-infused ice cubes to high-end restaurants. "Arthur, this is it," he'd boomed, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement. "This is the one. We're not selling ice. We're selling an experience. But the banks, they don't get it. They're stuck in the past." I had tried to be gentle. "David, it sounds speculative. The overhead alone must be astronomical." His face had clouded over instantly. He knew which buttons to press. "Eleanor would have believed in me," he'd said, his voice dropping to a wounded whisper. "She always saw the big picture. She knew I was family." He played the memory of my wife like a trump card, and like a fool, I let him. I co-signed the loan. Not because I believed in artisanal ice, but because in that moment, saying no felt like a betrayal of Eleanor herself. 6 months later, Aqualux melted into oblivion, and I was left with a monthly payment that was a monument to my own weakness. For David, I was the fool at the family table, the one whose sentimentality could always be leveraged for a quick score. So, you see, Richard's words, poor financial planning, were not just an insult. They were the chorus to a song I had been listening to for years. They were all singing it. My son, the pragmatist. My daughter, the victim. My brother-in-law, the dreamer. Each of them had a role to play, and in their play, I was cast as the aging, sentimental, and slightly incompetent provider whose only remaining purpose was to fund their lives until the final curtain call. But the script had changed. A new author had entered the scene, armed with a winning ticket and a lifetime of receipts. I opened the old leather-bound journal Eleanor had given me years ago. Its pages were mostly empty. I had never felt my life was worth recording. Now, it was in ledger, a book of accounts. I wrote Richard's name at the top of a clean page. Beside it, I wrote his exact words, the date, and the time of the call. I did the same for Chloe, for David. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about creating a record so clear, so undeniable, that it would burn through the fog of their excuses and justifications. They had built their worlds on a foundation of my quiet compliance. I was about to test the integrity of that foundation with a seismic event of my own making. My plan was simple, and in its simplicity I found a cold, clean power. I wouldn't just tell them I had lost my money, I would show them. I spent 2 days at my desk, not as a retired engineer, but as a forger of my own demise. I used my old design software to create official-looking letters, one from a non-existent investment firm detailing a catastrophic loss in a high-risk emerging market fund. Another, a medical bill from a prestigious clinic for a complex and entirely fictitious heart surgery. The pièce de résistance was a notice of intent to foreclose from the bank printed on paper I had aged slightly with a tea bag, just as I had taught Richard to do for a school project when he was a boy. The irony was not lost on me. I was using the very skills I had nurtured in them, attention to detail, the importance of presentation, to craft their final exam. I placed the documents in a pile on the kitchen table, a stage set for the next act. The house was quiet. The ghosts of past sacrifices and forgotten thank yous swirled around me, but I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt like an engineer again, looking at a complex problem, a flawed design, and I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly what needed to be done to correct it. The audit had begun. It was time to make the next call. The next call was to Chloe. I waited a full day after speaking to Richard, letting the silence fester, letting them talk to each other. I could already imagine the conversation. Richard, pragmatic and annoyed. "I told you he wasn't managing his money properly." Chloe, wringing her hands theatrically. "But what are we going to do? This is so stressful." For me, their concern, I knew, would orbit entirely around how my problem would inconvenience them. When I dialed her number, I took a steadying breath and let a slight tremor enter my voice. It was a performance, and I was determined to be convincing. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and airy, the sound of someone who has just finished a yoga class. "Daddy, what a surprise! Is everything okay?" The practiced concern was almost perfect. "Not really, sweetheart," I began, letting the words crack just a little. Something terrible has happened with my investments. And there was a health scare. I had to have a procedure and the bills, Chloe. The bank is talking about the house." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. For a fleeting, foolish moment, a part of me, the father who had rocked her to sleep, hoped she might surprise me. That the daughter I remembered would break through the lacquered facade. The hope died quickly. "Oh, Daddy," she gasped, and the performance began. It was a masterclass in manufactured sympathy. "Oh, that's just awful. I can't believe this is happening to you. After everything you've done, you poor, poor man." She let the words hang there, shimmering with pity, but empty of substance. It was like a beautiful hollow chocolate Easter bunny. It looked good, but one tap and it would shatter. I waited. I knew what was coming next. The pivot. The gentle, sorrowful turn from my problem to hers. I just wish I could help," she sighed, a sound heavy with fabricated regret. "But the timing is it's a nightmare. The market has been brutal and Chad, you know how his bonuses are tied to performance. Well, it's been a lean year. We're having to make cutbacks. cutbacks. I pictured her new German SUV, the one she'd called an essential safety upgrade for the children. I pictured the landscapers who manicured her lawn into a green carpet twice a week. I pictured her investment in Tuscan well-being. And, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we've just put down the non-refundable deposit for the children's ski trip to Aspen. You know how much they were looking forward to it. I couldn't possibly disappoint them. Their little hearts would break. Of course, the children's hearts. They were always the final unassailable line of defense, a shield made of pure, weaponized sentimentality. I understand, I said, my voice flat. I made no effort to sound disappointed. I was a scientist now, merely observing and recording the data. I knew you would, she said, relief flooding her voice. She was off the hook. You're so strong, Daddy. You always have been. You'll figure something out. You always do. And there it was, the ultimate abdication of responsibility, dressed up as a compliment. It wasn't, we'll help you figure this out. It was, you'll figure this out. I was alone on my sinking ship, and she was on the shore, waving a silk handkerchief and praising my swimming ability. I will pray for you, Daddy, she finished, her voice once again angelic. Every single night. Thank you, Chloe, I said, and ended the call. I turned to my journal and opened it to her page. Underneath her name, I wrote, expressed deep sympathy. Detailed her own financial hardships, weaponized children's happiness, offered prayers, no offer of tangible help. The entry was as cold and precise as an autopsy report. The calls were the easy part. They were remote, buffered by the impersonality of the phone. The real test, the moment that would require a different kind of strength, was the inevitable in-person visit, and I knew exactly who would arrive first. David showed up 2 days later, just as I was finishing my lunch. He didn't knock. He had a key I'd given him years ago, for emergencies. It seemed he had decided this qualified. He let himself in, his face a mask of grave concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes were scanning, assessing, calculating. Arthur, he boomed, striding into the kitchen and enveloping me in a hug that smelled faintly of desperation and cheap cologne. I just heard. Richard called me. I came as soon as I could. My God, man. How are you holding up? I'm managing, David. I said, extracting myself from his grip. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, leaning forward with an air of immense sincerity. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound sadness on his face. It's a crime, is what it is. A man like you, who's worked his whole life, to have it all snatched away by some faceless corporation. And the medical bills, it's the system. Arthur, the whole system is rigged against the little guy. He was good. I had to give him that. He knew how to build a sense of camaraderie, of shared victimhood. We were two honest men, battling against a cruel, unjust world. He let the silence sit for a moment, allowing his performance to settle in. Then he moved in for the kill. Look, he said, lowering his voice. I know I don't have the kind of cash Richard or Chloe's husband has. I'm just a dreamer, you know? Always have been. But family is family. And I've been thinking. I have a solution. A way to protect you. I stayed silent, my expression neutral. I was a blank canvas, and I was letting him paint his masterpiece of deceit all over it. The bank, he continued, leaning in even closer. They're vultures, Arthur. They're going to take this house and they'll sell it for pennies on the dollar. At auction, you'll be left with nothing. Worse than nothing. You'll have a foreclosure on your record. It's a stain. He paused for dramatic effect. But what if you sold it to me? Now, before they can get their claws into it. Sold it? I asked, feigning confusion. David, I don't understand. You just said you don't have any cash. A sly, triumphant smile flickered across his lips before he suppressed it. Not with cash, no, but with an agreement. We'll draw up a contract. You sign the deed over to me. Officially, the house becomes mine. The bank can't touch it because it's no longer your asset. I'll take on the mortgage payments. We can work out the details later. And here's the best part. You get to stay here for as long as you need. A life estate, they call it. You live here, rent-free, until, well, you know. And I get to keep this beautiful house in the family, just like Eleanor would have wanted. It was a brilliant predatory move. He was offering to save me from the bank by stealing my single greatest asset from right under my nose. He would get a multi-$100,000 house for the price of a few mortgage payments, and I would be reduced to a tenant in my own home, living there at his mercy. And he did it all under the sacred banner of Eleanor's memory. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. He saw the hesitation on my face and mistook it for weakness. He pressed his advantage. Think about it, Arthur, he urged, his voice thick with false sincerity. It's a win-win. You're safe. The house is safe, and you're not giving in to those corporate bloodsuckers. You're keeping it in the family. It's what's right. It's what's decent. He had already pulled a folded document from his worn briefcase. A pre-written sales agreement. He had come prepared. He smoothed it out on the table, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the worn wood Eleanor and I had shared so many meals on. I had my lawyer buddy draft something up just in case, he said, trying to sound casual. Just a standard agreement. It protects both of us. It protected him. It disinherited my children. It stripped me of everything I had worked for. I looked at the paper. I looked at his eager, greedy face. And I felt that cold, clean sense of purpose solidify within me, turning from iron into steel. They weren't just letting me sink. They were actively trying to dismantle my lifeboat for scrap wood. Let me think about it, David, I said, my voice quiet. This is a big decision. Of course, he said, leaning back in his chair, confident that he had won. Take your time, but not too much time. Those vultures are circling. He left the contract on the table, a venomous snake, coiled in the heart of my home. After he was gone, I picked it up. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I carried it into my study, opened my journal to David's page, and wrote, attempted to acquire house through deception, using Eleanor's memory as leverage. Presented a predatory contract. I placed the contract next to the journal. They were becoming quite the pair. Exhibit A and Exhibit B in the case of Vance vs. Vance. A case where the plaintiff, the judge, and the jury were all me. And the verdict was becoming clearer by the hour. The contract lay on my desk like a declaration of war. David's visit had clarified something essential. This wasn't just passive neglect or casual selfishness anymore. This was an active campaign. They saw weakness, a vacuum of power left by grief and age, and they were moving to fill it. They thought the game was already over. They didn't realize I was just setting up the board. For 40 years as an engineer, I designed systems, stress tests, load-bearing calculations, identifying points of failure. It was the language I spoke fluently. I had spent my life building things to last. Now, I would apply that same skill set to a careful, methodical process of deconstruction. Their world, built on the assumption of my weakness, was about to undergo a rigorous stress test. I knew I couldn't do it alone. Not because I lacked the will, but because I understood the value of an outside perspective. I needed a partner, a consigliere, someone who understood the rules of a game I was only just learning to play. There was only one name on that list, Sam Evans. Sam and I had been friends since we were two skinny kids fishing for tadpoles in Miller's Creek. He became a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate litigator who had spent 30 years eviscerating his opponents with logic and meticulously documented evidence. He retired a few years before I did, trading his courtroom pinstripes for a woodworking shop and the quiet satisfaction of making things with his hands. But I knew that beneath the sawdust and the comfortable flannel, the mind of a shark was still very much alive. I called him. I didn't tell him about the lottery. Not yet. That was my ace, and it wasn't time to play it. I simply told him what had happened since Eleanor passed. The constant financial drain, Richard's dismissiveness, Chloe's manufactured dramas, and finally, David's predatory offer for the house. I laid out the facts without emotion, like I was presenting a technical report. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, the silence on the line was profound. It wasn't the empty silence of indifference I got from my children. It was the heavy, weighted silence of a man processing enormous amounts of data. "Arthur," he said finally, and his voice was gravelly like stones tumbling in a riverbed. "I'm going to say this once, as your friend. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what they've become, and I'm sorry you've had to endure it alone." His simple, honest sympathy almost broke me. It was a glass of cool water after years in a desert of polite neglect. "Now," he continued, his tone shifting, becoming the lawyer I remembered, "let's talk strategy. They've made a critical error. They've mistaken your kindness for incompetence. That is an advantage we will exploit at every turn." "What do I do, Sam?" I asked. "First, you document everything," he instructed. "You've already started with your journal. That's good. But we need more. From this moment on, every significant conversation you have with them happens over the phone. And you will record every single call. It's legal in our state with one-party consent. They will hang themselves with their own words. Second," he went on, "you give them nothing. No more money, no more co-signing, no more emotional bailouts. Your bank is now a fortress, and you are the sole guardian of the gate. The word no is a complete sentence. Get comfortable with it. And third," he paused, "you need a professional, not me. I'm a retired woodworker who happens to know the law. You need someone in the game, someone who specializes in estate and trust law, someone who can build a legal structure around you so airtight that not even a whisper of their greed can get through." He gave me a name, Evelyn Reed. "She's the best," he said. "She has the heart of a poet and the mind of a tactical nuclear weapon. She'll understand exactly what needs to be done. Tell her I sent you." The conversation with Sam was the turning point. It armed me. It gave my righteous anger a blueprint. Before, I was a man with a grievance. Now, I was a man with a plan. I spent the next 2 days following his instructions to the letter. I bought a small, high-quality digital voice recorder. I practiced using it until it felt like an extension of my hand. I went to my bank and added new security protocols to my accounts, including a verbal password that only Eleanor and I knew. The young bank manager looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion, probably assuming I was a paranoid old man succumbing to dementia. I let him. Their underestimation was my armor. Then I scheduled the appointment with Evelyn Reed. Her office was in a sleek, modern building downtown, a world away from the comfortable, worn-in life I knew. The air smelled of success and expensive coffee. I felt out of place in my old tweed jacket, a relic from another era. But the moment I met her, that feeling vanished. Evelyn Reed was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She didn't offer platitudes or false sympathy. She offered a handshake and a quiet, focused attention that was more comforting than any hollow words could be. I told her everything, just as I had told Sam. But this time, I ended the story by sliding a piece of paper across her vast mahogany desk. It was a certified copy of the lottery ticket. She picked it up. Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not surprise, but a deep, professional interest. The kind of interest a grandmaster chess player shows when an unexpected game-changing piece appears on the board. She looked from the ticket back to me. $80 million, she said, her voice a low murmur. And you told them you were broke. I did, I confirmed. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile of profound intellectual satisfaction. Mr. Vance, she said, leaning back in her chair, this is no longer just an estate plan. This is a masterpiece of poetic justice waiting to be composed, and I would be honored to help you conduct the orchestra. For the next 2 hours, we worked. She was brilliant. She moved with a speed and precision that left me breathless. She sketched out a legal strategy that was both beautiful and brutal. First, the trust, she explained, her pen flying across a legal pad. We'll establish the Eleanor Vance Foundation, an irrevocable trust. Your entire winnings, once claimed, will be its sole asset. You will be the director, with full control over its disbursements during your lifetime. The foundation's mission, she looked at me, will be whatever you want it to be. I thought of Eleanor, her love for education, her quiet charity work. Scholarships, I said, my voice thick, for kids who need a second chance, and maybe a wing for the local hospital. Excellent, she nodded. Lofty, unimpeachable goals. It makes the structure bulletproof. Next, the house, she continued. We'll place it into the trust as well. You'll retain a life estate, as David so generously suggested. But upon your passing, the house becomes the foundation's headquarters, or is sold to fund its mission. It will never, ever pass to your children. And the will, she said, flipping to a new page. We will draft a new will that acknowledges all, your children. We will leave them each a nominal amount, $1 perhaps, a single symbolic dollar to confirm they were not forgotten, but deliberately disinherited. And attached to that will, her eyes gleamed, will be the most vicious, no contest clause my firm has ever drafted. If any of them dare to challenge it, they not only forfeit their dollar, but they will also be held legally responsible for all of the estate's legal fees in defending the challenge. It's a financial guillotine. They won't touch it. It was perfect. It was surgical. It was a fortress of law built from the very materials of their own greed. But there was one more piece. One final crucial element that would elevate this from a simple disinheritance to something more. There's a young woman, I began, my voice softer. My great-niece, Lily. Her mother was Eleanor's favorite. I told her about Lily, a bright young student struggling to pay her way through state college, working 2 jobs, never asking for a thing. Evelyn listened, her expression unreadable. She's not like them, I finished quietly. She has a good heart. Then we shall make her. The exception that proves the rule, Evelyn said. We will make her the first ever recipient of the Eleanor Vance Foundation Scholarship. A full ride, plus living expenses. We will do it quietly, without her knowing the ultimate source for now. We will give her the future her parents can't, and in doing so we will show what this money is truly for. It's not a weapon, it's a tool, and we are simply choosing to build something beautiful with it, instead of letting others use it for demolition. I left her office that day feeling a strange sense of peace. The weight on my shoulders hadn't vanished, but it had been repurposed. It was no longer the dead weight of grief and disappointment. It was the solid, heavy weight of purpose. I drove home and walked into the house that they all thought was a prize to be won. David's contract was still on my desk. I picked it up, walked to the fireplace, and held it over the empty grate. I didn't burn it. Not yet. I placed it back on the desk. A reminder of the battle to come. The pieces were in place. The strategy was set. The orchestra was tuning its instruments. All that was left was for the conductor to raise his baton and begin the first movement of a symphony they would never see coming. For the next week, I lived a life of deliberate, calculated inaction. My house, once a home, became an observation post. I was a field biologist studying a peculiar species of predator, noting their habits, their calls, their hunting patterns. My journal was my field guide, and my voice recorder was my hidden camera. The trap was set. The legal framework Evelyn Reed was building was the steel cage, invisible until the moment it sprang shut. Now, I just had to wait for the animals to wander in. I didn't have to wait long. My silence was a vacuum, and their nature abhorred it. They needed to fill it with noise, with drama, with demands. It began with Chloe. She called on a Tuesday, her voice a frantic whisper. "Daddy, I'm calling," from the side of the road. "It's the car. It's making that noise again, the one I told you about. The mechanic is saying it's something called a transmission solenoid, and it's going to be thousands of dollars. Thousands. And Chad is in Singapore for business. I'm all alone, and I don't know what to do." The Chloe of 2 weeks ago would have received my immediate, unquestioning support. I would have told her not to worry, to have it towed to the dealership, to put it on her credit card, and I would cover it. My pension check would have been rerouted from my account to hers before the tow truck even arrived. But the new Arthur, the conductor of a silent orchestra, had a different script. "That does sound stressful, Chloe," I said, my voice even and calm. I hit the record button on my device. "Have you tried calling your insurance? Sometimes roadside assistance is included in the policy." There was a pause on the line. This was not the response she was expecting. I had failed to follow my cue. "Insurance?" she stammered. "Daddy, this is an emergency. I don't have time to be on hold with some call center in another country. I need you to just handle it, like you always do." "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, and the apology felt clean and true in my mouth. "But my own finances are precarious right now. I'm afraid I can't help you with car repairs." The silence that followed was thick with indignation. "You can't?" she asked, her voice losing its damsel-in-distress tremor and gaining a sharp, accusatory edge. "What do you mean, you can't?" "It's a car repair, Daddy, not a private jet. After all the emotional support I've given you these past few weeks, I would think—" She trailed off, realizing her mistake. She had just admitted that her emotional support was a commodity for which she expected payment. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. "I hope you get it sorted out." I ended the call before she could recalibrate her tactics. I noted the exchange in my journal, word for word. She had revealed her hand. Her love was conditional, her sympathy a down payment on a future withdrawal. 2 days later, it was Richard's turn. He didn't call. He sent a text message, the preferred medium of the emotionally detached. It was a link to a real estate listing. A small, sterile-looking apartment in a senior living community an hour out of town. The text below the link read, "Dad, might be a good time to start being proactive. This place has a waiting list. We should schedule a tour." He wasn't suggesting it. He was instructing me. He had already moved on from my financial crisis to the logistical problem of what to do with me once I was homeless. I wasn't his father. I was an inventory item that needed to be moved into a more efficient storage facility. I didn't reply to the text. I took a screenshot and emailed it to Evelyn Reed with a simple subject line, "For the file." Her reply came back in minutes. "Received." "This is excellent." "Excellent." I found myself smiling. It was a strange, cold feeling, to see the evidence of your children's callousness and to feel a sense of grim satisfaction. It was the feeling of a prosecutor watching the opposing counsel make a fatal, unforced error in court. The main event, however, arrived on Saturday. It was David, of course. He appeared on my doorstep, a bouquet of cheap grocery store carnations in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. He was a caricature of a concerned relative. "Arthur, my man," he said, brushing past me into the house. "I was just in the neighborhood, thought I'd check in, see how you're holding up. Brought you some flowers to brighten the place up." He set the garish pink carnations on the kitchen counter. They looked absurd next to the single, elegant white orchid Eleanor had nurtured for years, which I still managed to keep alive. He was there, I knew, for one reason, to get a signature on his contract. "David, thank you," I said, my voice polite. "But you didn't have to." "Nonsense." He waved a hand. "It's the least I can do. Now listen. I've been doing some thinking about our little arrangement." He sat at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join him, as if he were the host in my home. "And I think it's the right move. The only move. Have you had a chance to look over that agreement?" "I have," I said, sitting opposite him. "Good, good." He nodded eagerly. "It's straightforward, right? A simple transfer to protect the asset. So, what do you say? Shall we make it official? I've got a pen right here. We can sign it. I'll get it notarized on Monday, and all your worries are over." He was radiating a desperate, predatory energy. He was a hyena trying to convince a wounded lion to lie down and die peacefully. This was the moment. The moment to test the first layer of the trap. "I'm not sure, David," I said, letting a note of weary confusion enter my voice. "Richard called. He thinks it's a terrible idea. He said I should sell the house on the open market and give him the money to invest." David's face darkened. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the raw greed beneath. "Richard," he scoffed. "What does he know? He's a numbers guy. He doesn't understand family. He'd see you out on the street if it meant an extra quarter point on his returns. He wants to sell your home, your history, to some stranger." The hypocrisy was so potent it was almost comical. He was accusing Richard of the very thing he was trying to do, only with a more elaborate disguise. "And Chloe," I continued, adding another piece to the board. "She thinks I should just stay put. She says the universe will provide." David rolled his eyes so hard I thought he might sprain something. "Chloe lives in a fantasy land funded by her husband's stock options. The universe isn't going to pay your mortgage, Arthur?" "I am. I'm the one who's here on the ground offering a real practical solution." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "They're your kids, Arthur. I get it. But they're not thinking clearly. They're not thinking about you. I am." He pushed the contract, which he had brought again, across the table. "This is the only way to be sure. Sign it. Let me protect you from them and from the bank." I looked at his face, flushed with a sense of his own cleverness. He thought he was playing chess. He had no idea he was a pawn in a much larger game. I sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of a man defeated. "You're right, David," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You're the only one who seems to really care." His eyes lit up. Victory. "But," I said, holding up a hand, "I can't sign it today, not on a Saturday. It feels wrong, unlucky, and I need to talk to my lawyer, just to make sure everything is, above board." The light in his eyes dimmed, a flicker of suspicion. "Lawyer? What lawyer? I thought you couldn't afford—" "An old friend," I said quickly. "Sam Evans. He's retired, but he agreed to look things over for me, as a favor. He said he could see me on Monday afternoon." David relaxed, but only slightly. He saw Sam as a minor obstacle, an old man like me who could be easily persuaded. "Monday," he repeated. Okay, Monday it is. You talk to Sam. He'll see that my offer is the most generous one on the table. He's a smart man. He'll understand." He stood up, clapping his hands together with false finality. "Then on Tuesday we sign, and this nightmare is over for you." He left feeling confident, but I had just bought myself 48 crucial hours, and I had confirmed his intentions on a crystal-clear digital recording. The lion wasn't just wounded anymore. He was taking notes, and he was getting ready to roar. But the real turning point, the moment that burned away the last vestiges of my hesitation, didn't come from any of them. It came from a place I never expected. It came from the memory of Eleanor herself. Monday morning arrived with a gray, weeping sky. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall a heavy footstep of time marching forward. I spent the morning in the garden, or what was left of it. It was Eleanor's sanctuary. After she was gone, I had tried to keep it up, but my heart wasn't in it. The roses were leggy, the hydrangeas had failed to bloom this year. But one section, one small, perfect square of earth, I tended to with a devotion that bordered on religious. It was her lavender patch. She had planted it the year we moved into this house, 40 years ago. "For peace, Arthur," she had said, pressing the small purple shoots into the dark soil. "Whenever the world gets too loud, you come here. The scent will remind you of what's real." And it did. Through job losses, through children's fevers, through the arguments and the reconciliations, that lavender was my anchor. After she passed, its fragrance was the only thing in the world that still felt like her. It was more than a plant. It was a living memory. It was the last piece of her soul that I could touch. I was on my knees, gently weeding around the silvery green stalks when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I didn't need to look up. It was Chloe. Her visits were always unannounced, always at her convenience, and always a prelude to a request. She emerged from her gleaming SUV, holding a ridiculously large umbrella, and teetered across the wet lawn, in heels that were completely impractical for the weather. She looked like an exotic bird, blown off course and deeply annoyed by the rustic scenery. "Daddy!" she called out, her voice sharp with impatience. "What are you doing out here in the rain? You'll catch your death!" She didn't say it with concern. She said it with the weary tone of someone who couldn't bear the thought of having to deal with another problem. "Just tending to your mother's lavender, sweetheart," I said, slowly getting to my feet, my old knees protesting. She glanced at the lavender patch, her nose wrinkling slightly. "It's a bit overgrown, isn't it? Very messy." She dismissed 40 years of devotion with a single careless adjective. "Anyway, I can't stay long. I just came to talk some sense into you." She herded me into the kitchen, which she immediately began to survey with a critical eye. "This place is so dated, Daddy. The countertops, the linoleum. It's depressing." She wasn't just insulting my home, she was erasing my wife's taste, our shared history, with every flick of her disdainful gaze. "What did you want to talk about?" "Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. The recorder in my pocket was running. She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. "David called me," she said. "He told me about his incredibly generous offer to take the house off your hands, and he also told me that Richard is trying to get you to sell it to strangers. I cannot believe the selfishness." I waited, saying nothing. I knew this was just the overture. "Look, Daddy," she said, finally getting to the point. "Neither of them is right. David is, well, he's David, and Richard only thinks in spreadsheets. They don't understand the emotional value of this place." She placed a hand on her heart. "I do. This is my childhood home. It means something to me." For a moment, that old, foolish hope flickered again. Was it possible I had misjudged her? "That's why," she continued, her voice becoming bright and decisive, "I've come up with the perfect solution. The only solution, really." She paused, waiting for me to ask. "And what is that?" I obliged. "You signed the house over to me," she announced, as if presenting me with a wonderful gift. "Not sell it. A simple transfer of deed. That way it stays in the family, the real family. I will manage it. I'll make sure it's taken care of. And you, of course, can live here for as long as you need to. It's the cleanest, most loving way to handle this." I stared at her. The audacity was stunning. She had taken David's predatory plan and repackaged it in the language of sentimental love. She was a vulture who had learned to sing like a canary. "So, you want me to give you my house?" I said, my voice flat. "It's not giving, Daddy," she corrected, her tone patronizing. "It's preserving. I'll be the custodian of our family's legacy, and it makes the most sense. When the time comes, it will be so much simpler for probate. It's just Smart planning. Smart planning, I repeated, the echo of Richard's words chilling me to the bone. They were all reading from the same script. Exactly, she beamed, relieved that I was finally understanding. So, what do you say? We can go to a lawyer this week. My lawyer. He's excellent with these sorts of family arrangements. This was it. The precipice. I knew I had to push her to see how far she would go. And what would you do with it? I asked, gesturing around the old kitchen. With the house? Her eyes lit up with a genuine excitement I hadn't seen in years. It was the excitement of a developer, not a daughter. Oh, Daddy, it has so much potential. It just needs an update. We'd have to tear out this kitchen, of course. It's a total gut job. And the living room, we'd open that up, get rid of these old dark wood panels. And the garden... She walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked yard. My heart seized in my chest. I knew what was coming. The garden is the real opportunity, she mused, already redesigning my life. That whole back lawn, it's wasted space. We could put in a beautiful stone patio, an outdoor kitchen, maybe a fire pit, and that messy lavender patch. She turned. To me, her eyes bright with her terrible vision. We'd have to rip all of that out, obviously. It's the first thing that would have to go. The world went silent. The ticking of the clock, the drumming of the rain, the hum of the refrigerator. It all just stopped. All I could hear was a roaring in my ears. All I could see was her face, smiling as she casually announced the desecration of my wife's soul. She wanted to rip out the lavender. It wasn't just a plant. It wasn't just a memory. It was the last sacred piece of Eleanor that I had left. It was the one thing in this world that was not for sale, not for negotiation, not for updating. And she had just condemned it to death with the same casual air she might use to order a latte. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part of me that had held out hope, the part that had made excuses, the part that still saw her as the little girl with scraped knees and pigtails. It turned to dust and blew away. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my daughter. I saw a stranger. A stranger with a familiar face and a hollow chest, standing in my wife's kitchen, planning to pave over her grave for a fire pit. My voice, when it came out, was a whisper, a sound so cold and quiet that it made her take a step back. Get out. She blinked, confused. What? Daddy, what are you talking about? We're just discussing ideas. I said, I repeated, my voice still a whisper, but now it was the whisper of a blade being unsheathed. Get out of my house. The mask of loving concern dropped from her face, replaced by a flash of pure, ugly anger. How dare you? She hissed. After everything I've done for you, listening to your pathetic stories of being poor, I am trying to help you. You are an ungrateful, stubborn old man, and you will die alone in this dump. She spun on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking. A furious rhythm on the linoleum she so despised. The front door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. I stood there for a long time, my hands gripping the back of a kitchen chair so tightly my knuckles were white. The roaring in my ears slowly subsided, replaced by a profound, terrifying calm. She was right about one thing. I was a stubborn old man, but I wasn't going to die alone in a dump. I walked into my study, my steps steady and sure. I picked up the phone. I didn't need to look up the number. Evelyn Reed's office, the crisp voice of her assistant answered. This is Arthur Vance, I said, and my voice was no longer the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a client giving a direct order. Please tell Ms. Reed that the preliminary planning phase is over. We are moving to immediate and full execution. It's time. The turning point wasn't a decision. It was a chemical reaction. It was the moment grief and love and rage were fused together in the furnace of her final unforgivable insult. They had tried to take my house. They had tried to take my money. But when she came for my wife's lavender, they declared a war they had no idea how to win. The old Arthur Vance, the quiet, accommodating father, had died in that kitchen, and the man who picked up the phone was someone they had never met, and they would come to regret that profoundly. The slam of Chloe's door was not an ending. It was an ignition. It was the starter pistol for a race they didn't even know they were running. The calm that settled over me in the aftermath wasn't peace. It was focus. The pure, undiluted focus of an engineer who has identified a catastrophic, structural failure and is now initiating a controlled demolition. My call to Evelyn Reed set a silent, efficient machine into motion. While my children and brother-in-law were still operating under the assumption that they were dealing with a confused, grieving old man, a team of legal professionals was erecting a fortress around my life, brick by legal brick. First, the lottery ticket. Evelyn had devised a discreet and brilliant method for claiming it. We didn't walk into the state lottery office with cameras flashing. Instead, she used a provision in the law to claim the prize through a blind trust. A third-party lawyer, a man I had never met and never would, became the public face of the winner. The $80 million, minus taxes, was deposited into an account under the name the Northwood Group LLC, a temporary entity that existed for less than 72 hours. From there, the entire sum was wired directly to the newly established, federally chartered bank account of the Eleanor Vance Foundation. To the world, the winner was an anonymous, faceless corporation. My name was nowhere near it. The money was clean, secure, and utterly untraceable to Arthur Vance, the retired engineer. It had become a ghost, just as I had been in my own family. But this ghost was powerful. While the funds were being secured, Evelyn's team worked on the other fronts. The deed to my house was quietly transferred into the foundation's ownership. My new will, with its single-dollar bequests and its beautiful, terrifying no-contest clause, was signed, witnessed, and filed with the court. Powers of attorney were executed, giving Sam Evans and Evelyn as his backup total authority over my medical and financial decisions in the event I became incapacitated. The legal guillotine was in place, polished and waiting. Meanwhile, I played my part. I became the man they expected me to be, lost, overwhelmed, and pliable. When Richard called the next day, his voice a mixture of annoyance and condescension, I let the weariness back into my own. "Dad," he said, skipping any greeting, "Chloe told me you had some kind of episode. She was very upset. You can't just throw people out of your house." "She wanted to tear out your mother's garden, Richard," I said, my voice soft and wounded. It was the truth, but I delivered it as a victim, not as a warrior. He sighed, the sound of a busy man dealing with a senile parent. "Okay, look, let's not get sentimental. She was talking about property value. It's what people do. You're overreacting. We need to have a family meeting. All of us. We need to sort this out for your own good. My office, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Be there." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. They were going to corner me, the three of them, and pressure me into submission. They thought they were arranging my surrender. In reality, they were walking directly into the kill zone I had prepared for them. "Okay, Richard," I said meekly. "If you think it's best." "I do," he said and hung up. I immediately called Evelyn. "The meeting is on," I said. "His office, Wednesday at 10. "Excellent," she replied, her voice crisp. "My paralegal will deliver the invitations this afternoon. They will be attending a different meeting." That afternoon, a professional courier arrived at Richard's gleaming corporate office, at Chloe's sprawling suburban home, and at David's ramshackle apartment. Each of them received a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the crest of a prestigious downtown law firm. Inside was not a friendly request. It was a formal, legally binding summons to a mandatory board meeting for a new foundation of which they were, to their surprise, listed as potential honorary non-voting members. The meeting was to discuss the foundation's mission and initial strategic direction. The location was not Richard's office. It was a conference room at the law offices of Reed, Thatcher and Associates. The time was Wednesday, 10 a.m. At the bottom of the letter was a carefully worded sentence. Attendance is required to establish eligibility for any and all future considerations. Non-attendance will be recorded as a formal forfeiture of all potential interests. It was a brilliant move. Evelyn had used their own language, the language of corporate importance and financial stakes, to bait the trap. The mention of potential interests was the cheese. They wouldn't be able to resist. The thought that there was money on the table, a new foundation they knew nothing about, would be an irresistible siren song. They would come not to help me, but to stake their claim. Wednesday morning was a masterpiece of stagecraft. I did not go to Evelyn's office. That was her theater, and she was the director. My role was elsewhere. Instead, I went to the university. I had arranged a meeting with the Dean of Scholarships, a warm, intelligent woman named Dr. Albright. I walked into her modest office and introduced myself not as a multimillionaire, but as a representative of the Eleanor Vance Foundation. Our foundation is new, I explained, and we wish to make our first endowment. My late wife was a passionate believer in the power of education. I slid a cashier's check across her desk. It was for $500,000. It was the first official act of the foundation. Dr. Albright stared at it, her eyes wide with disbelief. This will fund a full 4-year scholarship, I said, covering tuition, room, board, and books. It will be called the Eleanor Vance Second Chance Scholarship. And, I paused, we have already selected the first recipient. I gave her Lily's name. I explained that it was to be presented to her as a complete surprise. Dr. Albright looked at me, her eyes shining. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice thick with emotion. This is life-changing." "I know," I said. "That's the point." While I was building a future for a deserving young woman, my family was walking into their past. They arrived at Evelyn's office separately, each dressed for a corporate battle. Richard in a power suit, Chloe in a designer dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage, David in a shabby blazer that he had tried to make look important. They were seated in a large, intimidating conference room. The table was polished to a mirror shine. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Reed, flanked by 2 stone-faced junior partners. They were offered coffee and water. They were treated with impeccable, icy courtesy. They were completely and utterly disarmed. "Thank you all for coming," Evelyn began, her voice calm and commanding. "I am Evelyn Reed, counsel for the Eleanor Vance Foundation, and for its founder and director, Mr. Arthur Vance." I can only imagine the shock on their faces, the shift from confusion to dawning, horrified comprehension. "My client has asked me to read a statement into the record," she continued, opening a leather-bound folder in front of her. She looked at each of them, her gaze lingering for a moment before moving on. "He is not present today, as he believes his presence would constitute an emotional distraction from the clarity of the facts." She then began to read. She started with the story of the lottery win, a fact that must have hit them like a physical blow. $80 million, a number so large it was an abstraction, a dream they had been completely excluded from. Then she moved to the audit. She detailed my quiet sacrifices, quoting dates and figures. The sale of my Mustang for Richard's tuition. The cost of Chloe's healing trip to Tuscany, juxtaposed with the estimate for my leaking roof. The exact amount of the defaulted loan I had co-signed for David's artisanal ice cube venture. She laid their emotional and financial gluttony bare on that polished table, and it was a grotesque feast. These actions, she said, her voice never wavering, established a clear and consistent pattern of behavior that informed Mr. Vance's subsequent decisions. And then, she lowered the boom. She explained the creation of the foundation. She detailed how every single cent of the lottery winnings was now the legal property of that entity. She explained how the house, my house, was also its property. She explained my new will, the single dollar, the no contest clause. She explained it all not with anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. She was taking away their future, piece by piece, and using the law as her scalpel. The room, I was told later by Sam, who had been listening in from an adjacent office, was utterly silent. The shock was too profound for words. Richard's face was pale. Chloe's makeup couldn't hide the trembling of her lips, and David looked like he had been punched in the gut. But Evelyn wasn't finished. The climax of the performance, the true moment of poetic justice, was yet to come. She slid 3 documents across the table, one in front of each of them. "My client does not wish to be vindictive," she said. A statement. That was both true and a masterpiece of psychological warfare. "He simply wishes for a resolution. He has authorized me to make you a one-time, final offer." Hope. After all of that, she gave them a tiny, flickering candle of hope in the vast, dark room of their own making. And like moths to a flame, they were drawn to it, unable to help themselves. Hope is a more potent poison than despair. Despair makes people give up. Hope makes them expose their deepest, ugliest desires. Evelyn's one-time final offer was not an olive branch. It was a mirror, and she was about to force them to look into it. The documents she slid across the table were not settlement offers. They were resignation forms. "Mr. Vance," Evelyn explained, her voice as smooth and hard as the polished table, "has created 3 honorary, non-voting board positions for the Eleanor Vance Foundation, one for each of you. These positions come with no salary, no authority, and no financial benefits of any kind. They are purely symbolic." She let that sink in. She had offered them a title with no power, a seat at a table where they would have no voice. It was a perfect corporate insult. "However," she continued, "to accept this symbolic position you must first sign this document. It is a full, final, and irrevocable waiver. By signing, you formally relinquish any and all past, present, and future claims against the estate of Arthur Vance, his assets, and the Eleanor Vance Foundation. You will be legally and permanently barred from ever challenging his will, the structure of the trust, or any of his decisions for any reason in perpetuity." It was a masterstroke. She was asking them to trade a hypothetical, long-shot chance of winning a legal battle for nothing. For an empty title. For the mere appearance of being included. She was testing their greed against their pride. "Furthermore," she added, delivering the final exquisite twist of the knife, "there is one more condition. The Foundation's first act, which my client has already funded, is the establishment of a significant university scholarship. To accept your honorary position, you must each publicly endorse this act. You will be required to attend a small press event at the university next week, where you will be photographed with the first scholarship recipient, smiling and expressing your family's profound pride and support for the Foundation's philanthropic mission." The trap was complete. To get even the tiniest symbolic piece of the pie, they had to do 2 things they despised: legally surrender all claims to the money and publicly celebrate the fact that the fortune they believed was theirs was being given to a complete stranger. She was demanding their total, unconditional surrender, not just legally, but morally. She was forcing them to perform the role of the loving, supportive family they had so spectacularly failed to be. Richard was the first to break. His face, which had been pale with shock, was now flushed with a deep, furious red. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is insane!" he exploded, his voice shaking with rage. "A trick! You think we're fools? We are not signing anything. We are not endorsing anything. This is my father's money, and he has been clearly manipulated. He is not in his right mind. This foundation is a sham, a legal maneuver to steal our inheritance. We will see you in court." Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply raised a single, elegant eyebrow. "You are, of course, free to pursue that course of action, Mr. Vance," she said calmly. "However, I must remind you of the no contest clause I mentioned earlier. The moment you file a suit, you will have formally forfeited your $1 inheritance. And should you lose, which I assure you you will, my firm's legal fees will be billed directly to you. We are very expensive. I imagine the cost would easily exceed the value of your portfolio, as you call it." She looked at his suit, a subtle, devastating glance that took in the designer label and dismissed it as trivial. "I trust your financial planning has accounted for such a significant liability." The blood drained from Richard's face. She had used his own words, his own world view, as a weapon against him. He was a man who lived and died by the numbers, and she had just presented him with an equation that led to his own ruin. He sank back into his chair, speechless. Now, all eyes turned to Chloe. Her face was a tragic mask of disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of pure, frustrated entitlement. "How could he do this to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "To his own daughter? After I've been so supportive. I've worried about him constantly." She looked at Evelyn, her eyes pleading. "There must be some mistake. Daddy loves me. He wouldn't cut me out. Not completely." Evelyn's expression softened, but it was the professional, distant sympathy of a surgeon explaining a grim prognosis. "Ms. Vance," she said gently, "I have here a recording of your last phone call with your father, the one in which you informed him that your children's ski trip to Aspen was more important than him losing his home. Would you like me to play it?" "For the record?" Chloe recoiled as if she had been struck. The color drained from her face, leaving pale patches under her expensive makeup. The recording. She had forgotten. In her world of disposable emotions, she had never imagined her own words could be captured, preserved, and turned into evidence. "And," Evelyn continued, her voice still gentle but relentless, "he also asked me to pass along a message. He wanted you to know that he has made a special provision. The first project the Eleanor Vance Foundation will undertake after the scholarship is a significant donation to the local hospital to build and endow a new cardiac care wing. He said to tell you he found a better way to invest in healing than a villa in Tuscany." It was a direct hit, a perfectly aimed arrow tipped with Chloe's own saccharine, hypocritical words. She made a small, choking sound and covered her face with her hands. She wasn't weeping for her father. She was weeping for the life of effortless luxury she now saw slipping away forever. Finally, there was David. Throughout the entire proceeding, he had been strangely quiet, his face a jumble of confusion and dawning horror. He was a small-time predator who had stumbled into a cage with a lioness, and he was beginning to understand that he was hopelessly outmatched. He looked at the waiver in front of him, then at Evelyn. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a desperate wheedling tone. "Look," he stammered, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was only ever trying to help Arthur, to protect him. Family is the most important thing to me. Eleanor, she would have wanted me to look out for him." Evelyn's gaze was like ice. "Mr. Mills," she said, using his surname with a formality that stripped him of any familial connection. "You presented my client with a fraudulent contract designed to steal his home. You leveraged the memory of his deceased wife to do so. That is not looking out for him. That is a textbook case of elder exploitation. And I have the contract, the recording of your conversation, and a signed affidavit from my client detailing your threats about vultures circling." She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. If Mr. Vance so chose, he would have grounds for both a civil suit and a criminal complaint. However, he has chosen mercy. She pushed the waiver a fraction of an inch closer to him. He is offering you this one and only this one chance to walk away. I suggest you take it. David stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. The dreamer, the visionary, was finally face to face with the stark, ugly reality of his own character. There were no more grand ideas, no more schemes. There was only the cold, hard fact of his own treachery laid bare under the fluorescent lights of a legal conference room. Evelyn Reed stood up, a silent signal that the meeting was over. You have 24 hours to sign and return these documents via courier, she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. If we do not receive them by 10 a.m. tomorrow, this offer is rescinded, and my client will instruct me to proceed accordingly. Thank you for your time. She turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance, her junior partners falling in line behind her like a royal retinue. She left the three of them sitting there in the wreckage of their own making. Three people who had spent years treating their father as a resource, an afterthought, a problem to be managed, and in one single devastating hour, they had discovered the truth. He was not the foundation of their lives. He was the architect, and he had just condemned the building. The silence they had so often used to dismiss him now belonged to them. It was the silence of the checkmated, the silence of the utterly and completely defeated. The justice wasn't loud. It was the quiet, irreversible closing of a very, very heavy door. I was not in the room when Evelyn Reed delivered the final blow, but Sam was. He described the scene to me later. He said it was like watching a building collapse in slow motion, not with a bang, but with a deep, grinding groan of stressed foundations finally giving way. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They just sat there in the profound, echoing silence of their own irrelevance. The truth was too big, too absolute to fight. It had simply replaced the air in the room. They didn't wait 24 hours. The signed waivers arrived at Evelyn's office by courier less than 3 hours later. All three of them. Scrawled, shaky signatures at the bottom of a document that effectively erased them from my life. They had chosen the empty title, the symbolic. Humiliation over the financially ruinous and utterly hopeless legal battle. Their pragmatism in the end was the final chain in their own enslavement. They had assessed the risk and chosen the path of least resistance, just as they always had. Following week, the second part of their sentence was carried out. The press event at the university was a small, tasteful affair. It was held in the library's rare book room, a place that smelled of old paper and quiet dignity. Dr. Albright had arranged for the university's official photographer and a reporter from the local newspaper. It wasn't a media circus. It was a carefully managed piece of local good news. I was there. I stood quietly in the back, behind a row of bookshelves, unseen. I wanted to witness this, not for revenge, but for validation. I needed to see the final scene of the play I had written. Lily was the first to arrive. She was radiant. She wore a simple dress, her eyes shining with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. She clutched a letter from the foundation, her hands trembling slightly. She was the living embodiment of everything this money was meant to be. Hope, opportunity, a second chance. Then they arrived. My family. They looked like hostages at a treaty signing. Richard's suit seemed too tight, his face a grim, joyless mask. Chloe wore a black dress as if attending a funeral, which, in a way, she was. Her smile was a brittle, painted-on thing that didn't reach her vacant, haunted eyes. And David just looked small. The visionary had shrunk, diminished by the stark reality of his own insignificance. Dr. Albright, unaware of the deep, dark currents swirling beneath the surface, greeted them warmly. Mr. Vance, Ms. Vance, Mr. Mills. Thank you so much for coming. We are all so incredibly thrilled by the Foundation's generosity. Evelyn Reed was there, of course, acting as the Foundation's official representative. She guided them with the cool, efficient grace of a prison warden leading inmates to the visiting room. The moment came. They were asked to stand on either side of Lily for a photograph. The photographer, a cheerful young man, directed them. Big smiles, everyone! This is a wonderful day! I watched them arrange their faces. I watched Richard force a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. I watched Chloe's lips curve upwards while her eyes screamed. I watched David stare at the camera with the dead-eyed compliance of a man who has surrendered completely. They were puppets, and Evelyn and I were pulling the strings. They had to stand there, smiling, celebrating the transfer of a fortune they believed was theirs to a young woman who represented everything they were not: humble, hard-working, and grateful. They had to publicly endorse the very act that had sealed their disinheritance. It was a humiliation so perfect, so exquisitely tailored to their own vanities that no amount of shouting or anger could ever have matched it. The reporter asked Richard for a quote. As a financial professional, the young journalist began, you must be proud to see your father's legacy put to such good use. Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might break, that the rage would finally spill over. But then he caught Evelyn's eye. Her expression was neutral, but it carried the clear, unmistakable threat of mutually assured destruction. He swallowed. My father, he said, his voice a choked, robotic monotone, has always believed in proactive planning. The Foundation is a testament to that vision. He had managed to praise me using the very words he had once used to condemn me. It was his final bitter pill, and he was forced to swallow it in front of the world. After the photos, after the polite applause, they fled. They didn't speak to Lily. They didn't speak to each other. They scattered like roaches when the lights come on, each scurrying back to the wreckage of their own lives. I stayed hidden until they were gone. Then, I stepped out from behind the bookshelf. Lily was standing alone, looking at the large ceremonial. Check, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Albright saw me and gently steered Lily in my direction. Lily, she said, I'd like you to meet a representative of the Foundation's board. This is Mr. Arthur. She used a pseudonym we had agreed upon. Lily looked up at me, her eyes filled with a pure, unadulterated joy that was like a balm on my scarred soul. I don't know what to say, she stammered, wiping at her tears. I can't believe this is real. You've changed my life. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. The first one I had felt in a very long time. Eleanor would have been, very proud of you, Lily, I said, my voice thick with an emotion that was no longer grief. You are exactly the kind of person she wanted to invest in. I won't let her down, she promised, her voice fierce with determination. I won't let you down. I know you won't, I said. I left the university that day and walked, not to my car, but through the campus quad. I saw students hurrying to class, laughing, arguing, their lives filled with the messy, beautiful potential of a future they were building for themselves. This, I thought, was what $80 million was for. Not for Tuscan villas or artisanal ice cubes or bigger portfolios. It was for this, for the quiet, powerful engine of human potential. The climax of my story wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a shouting match in a conference room. It was this, the quiet redirecting of a river. I had taken a force that my family saw as a tool for their own selfish enrichment and diverted it, turning it into a life-giving current for others. I hadn't destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves with their own character. I had simply built something better in the space they had abdicated. The justice wasn't in their punishment. It was in Lily's future. It was in the quiet, profound, and irreversible rightness of the final outcome. The audit was complete. The books were balanced. And for the first time since Eleanor's passing, my own soul felt solvent. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a great storm. It isn't an empty silence. It's a silence full of weight and meaning, where the air itself feels cleaner, washed of all the noise and fury. That was the silence that settled over my life in the weeks and months after the meeting at Evelyn's office. The war was over. The treaties had been signed, and the world, my world, had been irrevocably redrawn. The fallout was quiet. There were no more angry phone calls, no more desperate text messages. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I had ceased to be a resource, and therefore I had ceased to exist in their world. Their silence was the most honest communication they had ever offered me. It was a clear and final admission that their interest in me had always been transactional, and the account was now permanently closed. I heard whispers, of course. Sam would occasionally pass along news he'd picked up through the small-town grapevine. Richard, he told me, had become withdrawn and sullen at work. The public humiliation of the press event, combined with the financial guillotine Evelyn had placed over his head, had taken the wind out of his sails. He was a predator who had been declawed, and he didn't know how to exist without the threat of his own superiority. He had built his identity on the idea of being a winner, and the undeniable public fact of his loss had shattered the very foundation of his character. He hadn't just lost an inheritance, he had lost the story he told himself about himself. Chloe's story was both more tragic and more predictable. Without the safety net of my endless support, the cracks in her gilded life began to show. Her husband, a man whose affection was directly proportional to his wife's social utility, grew tired of her constant, now unresolvable dramas. Sam told me they had separated. She had been forced to sell her large house and move into a smaller, far less glamorous townhouse. She had to learn the meaning of the word budget, a concept as foreign to her as quantum physics. She was a hothouse flower exposed to the elements for the first time, and she was wilting. Her suffering brought me no joy, only a deep, weary sadness for the woman she could have been if she had ever learned that character is a more valuable asset than charm. And David simply vanished. He packed up his shabby apartment in the middle of the night and disappeared. His grand schemes and visionary dreams had always been fueled by other people's money, and with his primary investor now permanently offline, his engine had run out of gas. He left a trail of unpaid bills and broken promises, a ghost who had finally faded completely. I did not seek out this information. I did not revel in their misfortune. Their downfall was a private, quiet affair, a slow collapse of structures, built on faulty foundations. It was the inevitable result of the choices they had made long before a lottery ticket ever entered our lives. It was, as Evelyn had predicted, a masterpiece of poetic justice, composed not by me, but by the symphony of their own actions. My life, in contrast, began to bloom. I sold the old house. The decision was surprisingly easy. The ghosts there were no longer just Eleanor's gentle spirit. They were the angry, grasping phantoms of my children's greed. The lavender patch had been desecrated by Chloe's words, and I could no longer find peace there. So I let it go. With Evelyn's help, the sale was handled through the foundation. A young family bought it, a doctor and a teacher with 2 small children. I met them once, briefly. I saw the way the wife's eyes lit up when she saw the garden, and I heard the husband talking about putting a swing set under the old oak tree. I knew the house would be filled with a different kind of life, a better kind. The proceeds of the sale, of course, went directly into the foundation's endowment, a final fitting act of turning a place of pain into a source of future good. Moved into a small, elegant apartment in a new, beautifully designed senior living community on the other side of town. It wasn't the sterile, depressing facility Richard had bookmarked for me. It was a place of vibrancy and life. It had a woodworking shop, a library that smelled of books and leather, and a sprawling community garden. My first act upon moving in was to claim a small plot of that garden. And the first thing I planted was lavender. A new patch, a new beginning. Life settled into a new rhythm, a rhythm of peace. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the hospital wing that the foundation was now funding. I spent my mornings in the woodworking shop, the scent of fresh-cut cedar, a clean, honest perfume. I made friends, real friends, who were interested in my stories of the past, not my bank balance in the present. I had conversations that weren't a prelude to a request. I saw Sam every Tuesday for lunch. We talked about books, about politics, about the stubborn piece of oak he was trying to turn into a bowl. We never spoke about my children. There was no need. Their chapter was closed, and then there was Lily. She became the bright, shining star in my new universe. The foundation paid her tuition, but I became her mentor, her friend, her surrogate grandfather. We had dinner once a month. She would tell me about her classes, her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, her struggles with organic chemistry. She was brilliant and kind, and so full of a fierce, beautiful gratitude that it humbled me. She never knew the full story. She knew I was a representative of the foundation, and that was enough. She didn't need to know about the darkness that had birthed the light of her opportunity. All she needed to do was shine. One afternoon, about a year after I had moved, she came to visit me at my apartment. She brought me a small, clumsily potted orchid. "I know it's not as nice as Grandma Eleanor's," she said, her cheeks flushed with a shy pride. "But I wanted you to have it. I'm on the dean's list, and I got a volunteer position at the children's ward in the hospital, in the Eleanor Vance wing." She looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I feel like I'm finally becoming the person she would have wanted me to be," she said, her voice a whisper. Thank you for giving me that chance." I looked at the orchid, at her earnest, hopeful face, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. The ledger was balanced, the accounts were settled. The pain of the past had been transmuted, through a strange and terrible alchemy, into the pure gold of her future. The $80 million had not bought me happiness. It had bought me clarity, and clarity had allowed me to do something I had forgotten was possible, to choose my own life, to choose peace, to choose joy, to choose family, not the family I was given, but the family I found, the family I built. My name is Arthur Vance. I am a retired engineer, a gardener, a woodworker, a friend, a mentor. And I am, finally, a man who understands the true meaning of wealth. It's not about what you have in the bank. It's about what you build in the world. And in the end, I had chosen to build a garden, not a fortress. And it was in that garden that my own soul, at long last, had found a place to bloom. It's a funny thing about life. You can spend decades building something, a family, a career, a home, believing you understand its architecture, only to discover one day that you've been reading the blueprints upside down. My family wasn't a structure I was meant to support. It was a cage I was meant to escape. The betrayal, as painful as it was, wasn't a demolition of my life. It was a liberation. It was a key, disguised as a hammer, that shattered the lock I didn't even know I was trapped behind. I sometimes think about Richard, Chloe, and David, not with anger. Not anymore. I think of them with a kind of distant clinical pity. They were trapped, too. Trapped in a prison of their own making, a prison of entitlement, of greed, of a deep, gnawing emptiness they thought could be filled with money and things. They saw my love not as a gift to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited, and in doing so, they impoverished themselves in a way that $80 million could never fix. My life now is smaller, but it is infinitely larger. My world is no longer defined by the four walls of a house filled with resentful ghosts, but by the open sky above my lavender patch, the warm camaraderie of the woodworking shop, the quiet dignity of the hospital corridors where Eleanor's memory now does its gentle, healing work. My wealth is not measured in account statements, but in the aha moments in Lily's letters, in the shared laughter over a cup of coffee with Sam, in the simple, profound peace of a quiet evening with a good book. I learned a hard but essential lesson. You cannot force someone to value you. You can only set your own value and then choose to share your life with those who are capable of recognizing it. Family, I have discovered, is not about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who listens. It's about who would offer you their last $500, not because they have it to spare, but because they believe you are worth the sacrifice. The Eleanor Vance Foundation is thriving. It has awarded a dozen scholarships now. It has funded new equipment for the cardiac wing. Its work is a quiet, steady ripple of goodness in the world, a testament to a love that was too strong to be erased by greed. That is Eleanor's true legacy. That is our true legacy. A few months ago, I received a letter. It was forwarded from Evelyn's office. It had no return address. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. It was from my son, Richard. It was not an apology. I don't think he is capable of one. It was a report. He told me he had lost his job. He told me his wife had left him. He wrote in a single stark sentence at the bottom of the page, "I think I am beginning to understand the meaning of dead capital." I read the letter, and then I did something the old Arthur never would have done. I put it in the shredder. Not out of anger, but out of a final quiet act of release. His life was his own to live, his lessons his own to learn. I was no longer his safety net. I was no longer his financial planner. I was no longer his father in the way he had understood the term. I was just a man who had finally learned to plan for his own future. So if there is a moral to this long and winding story, perhaps it is this. True strength is not found in how much you can endure, but in knowing when to stop enduring. True wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you give away. And true justice is not about revenge. It's about building a new and better world out of the rubble of the old one. My name is Arthur Vance, and for the first time in a long, long time, I am a very rich man. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It is in the sharing of our stories that we find our common strength. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Until next time, be kind, be strong, and remember to tend to your own garden.